Karen Martin accused me of breaking HOA rules, claiming my glowing unicorn was inappropriate and threatening fines. She prided herself on enforcing every tiny detail of the neighborhood, her self-righteousness driving everyone crazy. But she had no idea she was confronting the very person who wrote all the rules. And just wait until you see how the tables turned, and why justice in the end completely prevailed. My morning had started like any other. The comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the quiet hum of my laptop booting up, and the familiar ritual of scrolling through emails before the day officially began. The sun was just peeking over the hills of my California neighborhood, casting long golden streaks across the manicured lawns that everyone seemed so obsessed with maintaining. Life was predictable, pleasant, and entirely unremarkable. That is, until Karen Martin entered the scene. Karen Martin, everyone in the neighborhood knew her. She had a way of turning the most trivial concerns into major crises, wielding the HOA rules as though they were sacred scripture. Some called her meticulous. I called her relentless. And on this particular morning, she had apparently found her next battlefield, me. I clicked on her email with the sort of casual curiosity that usually accompanies a message from a neighbor. That curiosity evaporated instantly. My eyes widened and I leaned closer to the screen, unable to believe what I was reading. Karen had accused me of violating HOA rules. Specifically, she claimed that I had installed an unacceptable lawn decoration, a giant glowing plastic unicorn. Her tone was as sharp as ever. "This is a community violation. Remove it immediately," she wrote, punctuating her demand with that sense of self-righteous authority she wore like armor. For a moment, I froze. My coffee cup hovered mid-air. My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the absurdity of the situation. A glowing unicorn. Really? And now, Karen, the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer of all things decorum, was personally targeting me. The sheer audacity made my stomach tighten in a strange mix of disbelief and incredulity. As I sat there, processing the email, my mind started racing. Why me? Why now? Karen had been scanning the neighborhood like a hawk for weeks, calling out every minor deviation, an overgrown hedge here, a slightly crooked mailbox there. But somehow, I had managed to remain under her radar until now. Perhaps it was my luck, or perhaps it was just her obsession with control finally turning toward me. Then, another realization hit me, and my shock deepened. Karen had no idea who she was really dealing with. She didn't know that the rules she was quoting, the regulations she expected me to follow without question, had all been written by me. I was the HOA president. I was the one who drafted the bylaws, the one who decided what counted as a violation and what didn't. She was challenging the authority of the very person who created it. The irony of the situation was almost too much to handle. Here she was, sending her usual demanding, high-handed emails, convinced she had the power to dictate terms to me. And yet she was unaware that her accusations were completely powerless against reality. I felt a mixture of disbelief, amusement, and a creeping sense of anticipation. What would she do when she discovered the truth? Would she double down, oblivious to the futility of her actions, or would she retreat quietly into the shadows of embarrassment? For the first time that morning, the day felt alive with possibility. What had started as an ordinary morning, coffee, emails, and a casual walk, had transformed into a personal chess match I hadn't even anticipated. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my coffee slowly, and allowed a small, knowing smile to creep across my face. This was going to be interesting. Day after day, Karen's emails arrived like clockwork. each one more insistent and theatrical than the last. Her complaints ranged from the laughably trivial to the overtly dramatic. One morning, she criticized the angle of my garden gnome's hat, claiming it disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Another day, she sent a multi-page letter threatening fines for the way my garden lights cast shadows across the sidewalk. And once she even suggested, in her peculiarly formal tone, that I should expect the neighbors to take note of my repeated violations, implying some sort of community uprising against me. At first, I tried to suppress a smirk, but the more I read, the more irritation crept in. Her arrogance was infuriating. The self-righteousness in her carefully chosen words burned like a constant itch I couldn't scratch. Karen truly believed she was the guardian of the neighborhood, the ultimate authority on taste and propriety. She thought she could dictate what each resident could and could not do, believing herself untouchable and infallible. And yet, she had no idea that every rule she referenced, every guideline she wielded like a weapon, had been written by me. The absurdity of the situation only made my frustration deepen. Each letter she sent felt like a challenge, a personal affront disguised as civic duty. Her insistence on policing my lawn decorations became a daily irritation, gnawing at me, testing my patience. And yet, as much as I hated her smugness, I recognized an opportunity. Karen's relentless micromanagement made her predictable. Every move she made was a piece on a board I controlled, so I decided to play along. I adopted the persona of the most obedient, agreeable resident imaginable. Every complaint she raised, I acknowledged with exaggerated humility. I replied promptly, apologizing profusely for my oversights and promising immediate corrections. If she suggested fines, I pretended to brace myself for their impact. I even went so far as to thank her for her vigilance, my words dripping with irony that only I understood. This charade, while outwardly submissive, allowed me to watch Karen with a detached amusement. Her relentless attempts to assert control were like watching someone flail against invisible chains, energetic, intense, and utterly futile. Each email she sent reinforced my understanding of her character, rigid, obsessive, and utterly blind to the larger picture. My hatred, sharp and consuming, was accompanied by a strange sense of anticipation. I knew the climax was coming. I could feel it brewing in the tension between her misguided zeal and my hidden authority. As the days turned into a week, her letters grew more elaborate, more performative. She must have imagined herself the heroine of a moral crusade, unaware that the very rules she cited were authored by the person she sought to intimidate. And while her determination was impressive in its own way, it was also maddening. Every word she typed added fuel to my growing resentment, each demand sharpening the edge of my patience and my plan. By the end of the week, I had mastered the balance of feigned compliance and simmering irritation. I was outwardly deferential, inwardly calculating. The hatred I felt toward Karen, her smugness, her self-assumed superiority, her endless, tiresome letters had transformed into something more strategic. It had become the engine of anticipation. And as I prepared for the inevitable showdown, I realized that the game was no longer about her control. It was about the revelation, the moment when her perception of power would crumble completely. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and tension hung in the air like an uninvited fog. I had spent the morning reviewing documents, mentally preparing for the theater I knew Karen intended to stage. She had spent the entire week sending increasingly urgent emails, clearly envisioning herself as the neighborhood's moral authority, ready to publicly shame me in front of everyone. And now, she was about to try. When Karen walked into the community center, she carried a stack of papers so thick it looked like she might topple under its weight. Her expression was a mix of determination and righteous indignation, the kind of expression that had often intimidated others into compliance. She had clearly rehearsed her opening lines, her eyes scanning the room as though daring someone to contradict her. She approached the podium, cleared her throat, and began reading aloud, her voice firm, sharp, and completely convinced of her moral superiority. "This resident," she started tapping the papers, "has violated the HOA guidelines regarding lawn decor. The display in question is inappropriate and disrupts the aesthetic standards we uphold as a community." I sat quietly, leaning back in my chair, feeling a quiet storm of anticipation. Karen's words were precise, meticulous, but I could almost see the dramatic flourish she imagined she was delivering. The neighbors shifted in their seats, some nodding politely, others glancing at me with mild curiosity. Karen, unaware of the twist that awaited her, believed she was orchestrating a moment of public humiliation. Then I stood. The room's chatter subsided instantly as I walked to the podium. I smiled, not smugly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the full scope of the game. Karen's eyes flickered toward me, her voice faltering ever so slightly, though she tried to continue reading. "Wait a second," I said, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "Let's remind ourselves who actually writes these rules." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Karen's confident posture wavered. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the official HOA documents, spreading them across the podium with deliberate care. I flipped to the pages concerning landscaping regulations, decorative items, and all the so-called violations she had cited. Every single guideline bore my signature, my approval, and my authority as HOA president. The color drained from Karen's face. Her lips parted as she attempted to speak, but the words faltered, trembling against the undeniable truth. She had prepared her attack with all the certainty of someone wielding justice, but in reality she had walked straight into a trap of her own making. The anger she had expected to provoke in the room, to direct at me, had evaporated. Instead, the room's attention shifted, disbelief and amusement flickering across the neighbors' faces. For a moment, the silence was palpable, almost electric. Karen's meticulous notes, her carefully printed evidence, all of it was powerless against reality. I could see the frustration, the confusion, and the dawning realization that her authority had been an illusion, built entirely on a foundation she didn't even understand. I let the pause stretch, letting the tension build and then slowly dissipate. Her planned victory had transformed into her humiliation, not through insult or confrontation, but through the simple, undeniable truth. And in that moment, the anger that had been simmering between us, the tension, the resentment, the petty conflicts of the past week flipped entirely. The room had witnessed the reversal. The hunter had become the prey, and the rules themselves had spoken. The meeting ended in a way I hadn't dared to imagine, and yet it felt perfectly inevitable. Karen Martin gathered her papers with trembling hands, her earlier confidence now replaced by a fragile silence. She glanced at the neighbors, hoping perhaps for some small support, some nods of validation, but the room offered none. Instead, there were subtle glances of astonishment, whispers of amusement, and, eventually, a round of polite but genuine applause. I watched her retreat toward the door, the clack of her heels echoing in the hallway, and I felt a rare, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. It wasn't vindictive, not exactly. It was a profound sense of justice achieved without malice, a correction of perspective rather than an act of punishment. Karen had believed herself to be the enforcer, the arbiter of taste and propriety. She had wielded the HOA rules like a sword, hoping to intimidate, to control, to dominate. And yet, the very rules she had depended on so heavily had exposed her overconfidence, her lack of awareness, her vulnerability to the truth she had so confidently ignored. I allowed myself a small smile, savoring the irony of the moment. There is a peculiar delight in watching someone discover that their carefully constructed authority is nothing more than a mirage. Karen's self-righteous indignation, her unshakable belief that she could dictate what everyone did, had collapsed under the weight of the reality she had failed to recognize. The rules were only powerful in the hands of the person who truly controlled them. The neighbors, now murmuring among themselves, seemed to understand the gravity of the revelation. Even if they hadn't seen the full subtleties behind it. The atmosphere had shifted. The tension that had hung in the room like an invisible curtain now dissolved into a collective relief, a sense of balance restored. Karen's exit marked more than just the end of a confrontation. It signaled a quiet acknowledgement that knowledge and foresight were far more effective than aggression or intimidation. As I packed away the documents, I reflected on the strange satisfaction of the day. It wasn't about proving superiority or gloating over Karen's defeat. It was about witnessing a rare form of equilibrium. The community had been spared unnecessary conflict, and at the same time, the pretense of control that had fueled Karen's relentless scrutiny had been dismantled without a single harsh word. That subtle triumph was far sweeter than any public reprimand could have been. There was a lesson in this, one that I carried with me long after the applause faded and the meeting room emptied. Sometimes the true measure of power lies not in rules or regulations themselves, but in understanding their origin, their application, and the awareness of who really holds them. The gentle art of control isn't about confrontation. It's about foresight, patience, and knowing when to act. And Karen, in her determined arrogance, remained blissfully unaware. She had brought her own weapon to the field, only to find it turned back against her. It was a reminder, quiet but indelible, that the most formidable strength is often invisible until revealed at just the right moment. As I stepped outside into the warm California afternoon, sunlight glinting off the manicured lawns, and, yes, even the glowing unicorn, I felt a calm triumph. The day had been resolved not with conflict, but with clarity. Justice had not just been restored, it had been demonstrated, and in that demonstration, I found a satisfaction that lingered long after the meeting, one that was quiet, complete, and undeniably earned.